Hi everyone and welcome to a new episode of the Allplane podcast where we talk with the movers and shakers that are redefining the future of commercial aviation. As usual, before we get into today's episode, I would like to remind you that all previous episodes of this podcast, as well as many other aviation stories, are available on the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv. Allplane.tv. And I also would like to take this opportunity to invite you to subscribe to the Allplane newsletter about innovation and sustainability in the commercial aviation industry. You will find a link to subscribe on the Allplane website. Now, in today's episode, we will look at sustainability from the point of view of airlines, and not just any airline. Delta Airlines is one of the world's top 3 airlines in size, with a fleet of nearly 1,000 aircraft and more than 200 million passengers per year. But what is Delta exactly doing in the field of sustainability? Well, we'll have here today on the podcast Amelia DeLuca, Delta's Chief Sustainability Officer. Amelia has been on the podcast to talk about the many different initiatives, programs, and investments that Delta has in this space, or at least the ones that can be publicly shared. Because, as we shall soon see, Delta is very involved with a number of companies and organizations that are at the cutting edge of aerospace innovation. A case in point is the recently announced partnership between Delta Airlines and JetZero, a startup that is working on a truly revolutionary clean sheet blended wing body airliner design. But there are also a number of other initiatives that Delta is active in, covering from sustainable aviation fuel development to contrail research and, of course, investment in advanced air mobility. Because Delta is also an investor in Joby Aviation, one of the world's leading eVTOL developers. In fact, Delta has created something called Delta Sustainable Skies Lab to serve as a sort of umbrella for all these sustainability programs. But perhaps it's best if we hear it all directly from Amelia. So without further ado, let me welcome her to the podcast. Hi, Amelia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you so much for making time today for this chat. I think it's going to be very interesting. And I had wanted for a long time to get an overview of what's one of the top airlines in the world. Possibly by some measures, you are the largest airline in the world, or you have been at some point. And you manage the sustainability part. You're the Chief Sustainability Officer at Delta Airlines, which covers lots of different programs, initiatives, and you are active in many different fields to help decarbonize Delta Airlines. And of course, you have also a very big impact in what's commercial aviation in the US simply because of such a big player. I would like to start first maybe with a short introduction. Tell us a bit about yourself. I've seen you've been working at Delta for quite some time, different roles, and then maybe we can just move on to comment on the different programs and initiatives that you have at Delta Airlines, that there are many. I already warned the audience that we're going to talk about many different topics. We're going to talk about SAF, about advanced air mobility, and about some very exciting new aircraft programs that are coming up.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to this conversation. I have almost 20 years at Delta. It's the only place I've ever worked. It's the only career I've ever had. And I started out in the commercial organization and did a number of jobs there before moving to the sustainability team about 4 years ago. And my job is, the thing about sustainability is it does change. So in 2021, it was largely about setting audacious goals, moving the needle higher to advance SAF and net zero. And then since then, I think it's become a little bit broader to really make sure that we're providing not only a path to net zero, but also just a more sustainable travel experience today, addressing both, carbon emissions as well as waste, single-use plastics. I think the trust as a trusted consumer brand, just making sure that we have our consumers in mind in everything that we do for sustainability has been really key to our journey. It's not easy. It's very long term, especially for an industry that's very short term in nature. And so I think another part of our job is just looking at the systems that guide our company forward and figuring out how do we make tweaks on the edges so that these longer term decarbonization tools are considered when we're making, for example, a fleet decision today, and that aircraft is going to be flown for 30 years. We just want to make sure we're taking into consideration what is the cost of jet fuel going to be, including sustainable aviation fuel, at that future point, just so we're making the right decisions and the trade-offs on that business case.
On this podcast, we've got quite a few companies that are innovating in these fields, but very often they are companies that are very innovative, but they're rather small. But actually, Delta is a huge company. Just to give some numbers, you are somewhere around 950 aircraft, maybe more, because it's changing all the time. That's a very significant number of aircraft. You obviously have a big impact on the aviation industry in the US and in the world as well, of course. What I think is very remarkable is that you, since at least 2020, I think you are committed to the 2050 net zero goal.
Yep.
And you also have a roadmap, which involves also a 10% use of sustainable aviation fuels by 2030, which is literally around the corner. I mean, in aviation terms, it's not that far away. And we're going to talk more about this now, but you have been actively involved in a number of investment programs in things like, for example, Jet Zero, designing a clean sheet aircraft that makes a future significant contribution to not just decarbonization, but also in rethinking the way that we travel by air. Maybe we should start by talking about the way that you tackle all these challenges here at Delta. I think you have something called the Delta Sustainable Skies Lab. Is this the main organization? I don't know how to define it. If it's a working group, it's an entity that channels all these initiatives and all these investments.
Yeah. Well, I think the best way to think about our work is in 3 pillars, which is essentially what we fly, how we fly, and the fuel we use. And across each one of those horizons, there are things that are just really long-term in nature, just so far away. They're in the incubator stage, they're in the innovation stage, they're in research and development. And as they start to move out of those stages and into needing to test in a live operation, that's when the Sustainable Skies Lab comes in. So that can come in for fuel, it can come in for procedural changes, it can come in for fleet changes, you name it. So a great example is an announcement we made earlier this year at CES while celebrating our 100-year centennial. We were the first US airline to hit 100 years about a month ago. And we announced with Airbus that we were expanding our relationship in sustainability. We've had a long-standing relationship, obviously, as a company. And a couple of years ago, we also, committed that relationship to their hydrogen propulsion system. And at CES, we also announced that we would be taking a working product called Fellow Fly, which is formation flying, out of their research and development and actually moving it into a live flight trial. And that's all done through our Sustainable Skies Lab. And that's where we can offer best-in-class operational expertise. We can offer, testing, piloting, going with them to the authorities if we're looking for certification. And so that's the role of the Sustainable Skies Lab. It's also involved in things like how could we create a more circular product lifestyle for something that's coming off of the plane. So it's really that kind of leading edge, but we have to also consider that there is a lot we can do today, which is why it's Earth Month here. And we are really excited that later on this month, we'll be rolling out our new paper cups across our domestic system. We're continuing to make great progress with Sustainable Aviation Fuel in Minnesota. We're continuing to save jet fuel every day in how we operate. And so that's not run through the Sustainable Skies Lab because those are things that Delta people can deliver on today. And that group of people is really just looking long-term around the corner through the Sustainable Skies Lab to say, okay, what else do we need to do as we advance towards 2050?
Mm-hmm. Is there a priority order with all these different measures? Or is it like Sustainable Sky Lab is for things that are farther into the future, but then you also have a number of programs that could be like the SAF intake, for example, that are more immediate because they can already have an impact right now in operation, like in real operations in 2025? Because I guess some of them can be run in parallel, but they have different time horizons. So it's a bit tricky to allocate resources to one or the other.
Yeah, I think sometimes we have to remind ourselves too, what is the role of Delta? If it's a technology that doesn't need Delta support yet, then we don't need to prioritize it, meaning it's so far away, it's so nascent, it's being tested in a lab somewhere. Delta's people and our expertise isn't there yet. Versus you see us prioritize the things that we can have a direct impact on today. So again, we have 100,000 people at Delta, and for our frontline employees, so the people every day that are helping the operation run, 65% of those people now have a fuel KPI every single day. They know what they need to do to save fuel. I think that's where our focus has been the last couple of years, because we wanted to make sure that we started to prove that sustainability is good for business, i.e. saving jet fuel, saving one of our top costs. And we wanted to put that into the enterprise, which we've done And we've looked and changed management systems across the board to do that. I think similarly, we really prioritize sustainable aviation fuel because it's really important to our stakeholders. So our corporates and our cargo customers who travel on us similarly are trying to decarbonize. And so they were looking to us to say, we need sustainable aviation fuel available now so that we can achieve our climate goals now. And so it's kind of on those things where you're like, well, what as a consumer brand, what can we do? And then similarly, trust with consumers is really important right now. It's going to take, the aviation sector is going to take a long time to decarbonize. And so keeping that trust with consumers through showing we can do the small stuff, like replace our plastic cups with paper cups, by replacing our earbud packaging with craft paper instead of single-use plastic. All of those go a long way in keeping the trust as we try to tackle the even harder things, such as what is the aircraft shape of the future? What is the engine technology of the future? All those things are a ways off. And frankly, we got brilliant minds working on those things through partners like Airbus, through some of these startups you referenced, through universities. But they don't all need Delta's support right now. But some of them do. And so that's where you've seen us sign some relationships where it's gotten to the point where that partnership has become something where Delta can add value to their product and their scaling.
Well, I guess some of these technologies kind of pay for themselves. I think, for example, you've been working with a company that helps to improve the aerodynamics of aircraft and to basically save fuel that way. Then there are other technologies that need a bit of a push right now, like sustainable aviation fuel. I've seen you've been pretty active. I've got a list here of at least the ones that are public. You've got with Gevo, with the Northwest Advanced Biofuels, Metis, DG Fuels, Neste. Something very interesting here that I found is that you were the first to move sustainable aviation fuel by pipeline from Texas to the East Coast, which I found it quite interesting. So what can you tell me about this? Because it seems that there are some pretty substantial commitments here, most of them SAF from biogenic sources. Are you already covered when it comes to your goal of meeting this 10% threshold in 2030? Or are you still looking for more sources of fuel to get there?
Well, sustainable aviation fuel is probably the most challenging thing in my portfolio, but probably the industry's prioritization right now. It's a product, it's a completely nascent industry. It has a green premium on top of it. There are a number of technologies and feedstocks, and the majority have not been proven, not in pilot or not in scale. And so there is, and that's just the start of it, right? And then you mentioned things like pipelines, like blending. There are just an immense amount of challenges. How are these things counted towards regulation? So there's a lot of things about sustainable aviation fuel that are very challenging. And so when the industry got into SAF, to your point, during the last presidential administration, there were really lofty and ambitious goals that were put out there. The sustainable, the SAF Grand Challenge, for example, says that, we'll use 3 billion gallons of SAF as an industry in the United States in 2030. And I think what you've seen us do the last couple of years is start to build that from the ground up. And that's things like put the SAF in the major pipeline and have it, move up the pipeline on the East Coast to prove that works. We announced a blending facility in Minnesota, which feels very uncool, but it's incredibly necessary. If you're going to lift SAF out of Minnesota, you need to be able to bring in the SAF and then blend it with the traditional crude oil that's there and to be able to uplift it. I mean, it's even little things proving out what's possible. So we uplifted a first of its kind batch of SAF last year out of Minnesota and Detroit, which was using feedstock grown in Minnesota. It was a very specific sort of winter cover crop that had never been turned into sustainable aviation fuel. And so we proved not only can that be done, but also it can then move into the infrastructure and be uplifted. And so it's a ground up approach. It's definitely not easy. Financing is the biggest challenge. It's a very expensive product. We are very lucky at Delta that we've had such strong support from stakeholders like corporates and cargoes who have been with us saying that there's demand for this and helping de-risk the product. But it's certainly not a linear process. Every year we do use more SAF than the year before, but we're still at around 1% or less of our fuel usage that's being covered by sustainable aviation fuel. So we got a long ways to go.
Mm-hmm. And what are the criteria for you to partner or to select a specific SAF producer? Is there any cost rationale, or is a matter of getting the right incentives? I know in the US there's no mandates, right? I mean, it's all through incentives. In some states, I know there are different different schemes to make it more attractive to produce and to consume SAF. But what would be the main criteria that you choose when selecting a project or selecting a specific feedstock, for example? I've seen that you use a lot of biogenic sources from forestry, agriculture waste, etc. Is there a common thread unifying all these projects that you've been actively partnering with?
No, we are technology and feedstock neutral, meaning we are supporting everything that's being tested right now, which is why you see a wide variety of offtakes that we've signed, as well as support for various projects. I think the main thing at this point is we are looking for people who are truly like partners with like a big P, essentially. Like it's not just an exchange, it's not just a small either investment or offtake, that it's truly. Gevo is a great example. We spend a lot of time with Gevo at the federal level lobbying for incentives, as well as at the state level lobbying for incentives. We talk on the phone all the time, trying to support each other. They've hosted hundreds of farm tours for our corporate customers with us. And so that's just a sign of a great partnership, meaning we're in it together. We're both in it to make this work, not just for one of us, but for both of us. And so as we start to evaluate partnerships in the future, for example, you saw Airbus join the Minnesota SAF Hub. That is because we believe the SAF Hub model is the future, which is not just this bilateral relationship between an airline and a SAF producer. You need everyone at the table, from the agricultural players to the local corporates, to the OEMs, to the financiers. Bank of America, for example, is part of the consortium up in Minnesota. And so you've got to represent the whole value chain when you start to talk about producing SAF. Not only does it help de-risk it, but also brings more expertise to the table, which we think is probably the key to unlocking and solving some of these technological challenges.
Are you investors in any of these programs? An investor, I mean, as in equity investors. Like, for example, I know some other airlines like BA, for example, have been investing in some of these ventures to produce SAF.
Yeah, the power of Delta comes more from how we work with a partner. It costs billions of dollars to make a SAF facility, so our money wouldn't even make a dent in that. But again, if we show up with the entire value chain, whether it's lobbying for incentives or putting together a plan to finance a plant, or even trying to figure out, agricultural challenges around climate smart agriculture, that's where the power of Delta comes. And so that's what our relationships have been, is kind of this hub structure more than an individual one-off investment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the name of Delta, I mean, the sort of weight you carry in the industry, it's already quite a strong indicator of support for these type of projects. I mean, I see you are also part of a number of different groups, like Clean Skies for Tomorrow of the World Economic Forum, the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance, First Movers Coalition. So you've been pretty active in promoting the SAF rollout.
The thing I'll say about SAF that I love about it, it's a really refreshing space because all airlines and all parties are working with the same goal of decarbonizing aviation as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. And so it's really collaborative across the airlines as well. You'll see many of my counterparts in other airlines are in those same coalitions. Mm-hmm. Again, though, I have to point back to the Minnesota SAF Hub, because a lot of the groups, everyone's thinking about SAF, which is incredible, but building from the ground up means actually trying to get shovels in the ground. And the Minnesota SAF Hub has been just extremely fast in saying, we need to get shovels in the ground. So, about 6 months ago, we announced a blending facility, which is on track for this year in Minnesota, which will be incredibly fast and actually doing something about the problem.
And then you've got other projects as well that have more to do with disrupting the way we travel by air. You are investing in two very different areas. Well, I mean, both have in common that they are a completely new type of aircraft, but different uses and different finalities. One of them is Joby Aviation. Where Delta Airlines is an investor. I think you put something like $60 million. I don't know if that number has gone up since then, but you have a seat at the board, and you also launch. I think it's already possible to pre-book some trips. I think in New York and LA.
Yet. No, you can sign up.
You can sign up. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. No, we're not in the booking phase yet.
You can express interest in being, on being flown in one of the Joby eVTOLs.
Exactly.
Yeah, I must say I've been inside a Jovi. I don't know if it was a real one or a mock-up in Saudi Arabia where they had
Oh,
an
cool.
industry event and they were
Awesome.
exhibiting one of them. It's a really cool aircraft. So I guess that depends a lot on when the Joby aircraft is certified. But
Yep.
can we say that you, as soon as it becomes a reality in the US, you're going to be pretty much the first or one of the first to offer this experience?
Yeah, I would expect that. We've been hard at work at this with Joby, not just helping them, supporting them through the certification process, but in particular working on the infrastructure side. We've been really focused on operations in both New York and LA. Those are key hubs for us. They're also great markets to have an alternative in terms of how you get to the airport. And so, yeah, we're not ready today, but we are
Mhm.
working on being ready when they start service in the next couple of years.
And the idea is to integrate that into your operations as a sort of like a last leg shuttle for people that want to get to
Yes.
the airport from different locations in a radius, I guess, in New York and LA. And are you planning to offer it as a part of your? I mean, are we going to see Delta branded liveried Joby eVTOLs in these cities?
No, so it won't be, they will be Jobies. They won't be Delta. They're not part of our fleet. However, they will be integrated into the system just as we integrate other partners into our brand today, whether it's through the loyalty program or just through our digital and app experience. We will make it seamless for customers to get from their home to the vertiport to the airport and then reverse on the way back.
Yeah, I guess that's going to be quite attractive for premium passengers, for example,
Yes.
as a sort of perk for the top tiers of your loyalty program, stuff like that. There's another project that actually you announced. I mean, the project has been announced way earlier, but this year you announced you were joining forces with them, and that's Jet Zero.
Yes.
Which is a very interesting project. I can say I was at Le Bourget, the last edition of the Paris Air Show, when they started to unveil the concept. I found really interesting, and then shortly after started to take traction with the Air Force grant,
Yep.
I think, to develop it.
Yep.
And recently you announced that you were also partnering, supporting them in helping them redefine the passenger experience, which I think it's very fitting. I mean, as you mentioned, this year is 100 years of the foundation of Delta Airlines. So you were there at the very beginning of the industry, and now you're also having an active role in the next phase or the next, yeah, in redefining the next paradigm in the industry, let's say. Jet Zero is very interesting. It's a blended wing body concept. That means that if they succeed, we will start seeing aircraft that look like nothing. They look nothing like the ones we have now. It's a way more futuristic kind of look with all wings and fuselage in one piece. And of course, that means that the passenger experience is going to be different. So what can you tell me about this? I mean, what's your participation in this? Is it just a technical support in providing data, or are you planning to invest in this project? What's the plan?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. We are incredibly excited about what the Jet Zero team is doing. We've been partnered with them for a number of years behind the scenes, supporting their grant submission to the Air Force and whatever they needed to be successful in that. Then obviously they were successful, and we've had a seat at their airline working group for a number of years, and we're really excited about what they're designing because, to your point, we celebrated 100 years this year, and when you think about the next 100 years of travel and you think about the transformations that are possible, sustainability and innovation are at the core of all of that, and that's a perfect representation for what Jet Zero offers. It's not only 50% more fuel efficient, but it actually has a design that allows us to solve for many of the highest stress points in a customer's journey today. And so what we bring to the table is a couple of things. Obviously, we do have a lot of best in class operational experience that we'll talk with them about how to gate this thing and the routes that it would be deployed on and what the economics would need to look like to make that possible. Our tech ops teams are constantly going to be there supporting them as well as they go through decisions related to both the demonstrator as well as the commercialization beyond that. But I think more importantly, what we bring is data and just 100 years of understanding our consumers really well to say, okay, if you were going to start from scratch, which is essentially what they're doing, this is what you would design. And so things like we know that the highest point of stress is when a passenger is boarding a plane. And that's because it's tied to having access to their overhead bin space and the amount of time it takes to board a plane. We know that middle seats are not the preferred seat. We know that, we know a lot of different things. People like to be able to get up and use the bathrooms. We also know that accessibility for our customers who are traveling with wheelchairs is really a really big pain point right now. And so when you start with a fresh kind of approach, you can essentially solve for all of those as we start to build out the aircraft, because it's just much wider. You're not constrained by this single aisle or even 2-aisle wide body situation. You all of a sudden have a bunch of aisles because it's really wide. And they've just been really great partners as we've started to think through that. So we are really rooting for them, whether it flies on SAF or on conventional jet fuel. Using 50% less of anything is music to not just my ears, my CFO's ears. I mean, everyone would just be really excited about what they bring to the table.
Yeah, indeed. Actually, I've been talking with them to get them on the podcast as well and tell us more about the details, the technical details,
Good.
all of that. Yeah, but I think it was a good idea to mention it here, because that's, I think, one of the flagship projects that you are currently working on. And I think in 2027 it's planned to have a demonstrator already.
Yep.
So that's going to be really, really exciting. It's going to be conventionally powered, I think, at least at the beginning. But as you mentioned, it's expected to reduce fuel consumption by 50% for the equivalent payload and
Exactly.
capacity. So yeah, that's going to be quite a game changer. You're also active in other areas as well, like collaborating with MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, in contrail avoidance. Is this something that you are actively implementing now, or what can you tell us about these other projects that are underway in the, let's say, non-CO2 space?
Our university partners have been great partners across the board. They're really listening to our needs. We're one of the universities we work really closely with is Georgia Tech right now. That's laser focused on helping us to be able to further reduce our jet fuel usage today by looking at machine learning to potentially consider how we taxi, how we gate, all those items. So it's really exciting. When it comes to the MIT relationship, we've been underway with them for a couple of years, conducting research into solutions to identify first and foremost, and then mitigate persistent contrails. And, persistent contrails are really the key part of this, because that's the part that where the warmth is trapped essentially. And what we found in working with MIT as well as with other airlines is that we still have a lot to learn about how this actually happens. We haven't published findings yet because we're still essentially identifying their formation and their behaviors. And it's a lot more complex than we originally thought. And so that's where I think our kind of stance has been less on the mitigation and more so on the science of even identifying them and the behaviors, because that's the only way you're going to be able to do this right, is if you really understand when they're being formed and they're negative for the planet. And so MIT is just bringing just a really scientific rigor to that work.
Yeah. I'm seeing more and more people in the industry talking about this. A lot more effort going into researching this matter. There's something else I wanted to ask you about is in your website, you mentioned there's 5 technology projects that you are partner of. What are those? Are they the Z0, Joby, and these that we're mentioning now? Which ones are we missing?
So yes, we actually have 4 out of 5.
4.
We will likely have a 5th partner this year.
Okay.
Underway right now. So get excited for that. But through our Sustainable Skies Lab, we have a number of partners through the Sustainable Skies Lab, but we had a goal of getting to 5 by the end of this year of revolutionary fleet partners. And so we've already mentioned Jet0.
Yeah.
Airbus Zero-E is one, Joby is one, and the last one is Boeing's Transonic Truss Braced Wing, TTBW, which is just another commitment we have to just looking at wings and wing kind of length as an unlock for fuel efficiency.
Okay. And in some of these projects, I guess you contribute, as in the case of Jet0, with the other ones, you also contribute with your data know-how and letting information flow so that these innovators, revolutionaries, I mean, it's a revolutionary project, can pursue their work. Is that right?
Yes, and testing environments. So we provide, we're the consumer, so we're going to provide, thoughts on, hey, this type of seat configuration or density or economics would be appealing or not as a customer. Hey, this is what your gating situation would be if you had a long wing, and then testing environments to be able to test certain parts of it as they go.
lots of stuff. And of course, we didn't mention, well, kind of, but we didn't mention the other big contributor, which is the fleet renewal.
Yes.
Actually, getting a young fleet also helps. You have published some interesting stats as well. I think last year, or 2023 or last year, you got something like 43 aircraft that reduced fuel consumption by nearly 28%, which is quite a lot for compared to the aircraft that were being withdrawn. So it's just a pretty significant contribution. I just wanted to mention here, I guess Delta is continuing to renew the fleet constantly. So there's going to be more of that in the coming years until the Jet Zeros and all these other projects come to fruition. What's next? I mean, what are the next big things that you are working on at the moment that you can say? Of course, I guess there's lots of things going on behind the scenes that can be explained yet.
Yep.
But
well, 2025 is a really exciting year, and it is, again, it's our 100-year centennial, and we've got some really cool stuff. Some of the stuff that we've already talked about, like Jet Zero. At CES, we also debuted an upcycled suitcase prototype made from retired aircraft metal. So we've got some like really cool things. It's Earth Month, where we'll be debuting our paper cup across our domestic network, a first of its kind, truly paper cup, no plastic liner. And then I think the two kind of big must-dos for the year for us would be we have very aggressive fuel savings goals through our Carbon Council. So that's the group that sits and works across our operation every day through our frontline teams to essentially be able to save jet fuel. We have a public milestone of 45 million gallons of jet fuel saved through Carbon Council this year. We are well on track for that and should crush that goal. And we'll be really excited to tell the world, because it's the first decarbonization milestone that is really come since we've set out our strategy a few years ago, and it's fully within our control. So if we miss it, well, that's on us. And so we think it's a big trust building moment to kind of say, hey, we said we were going to do this and we did this, and then a lot more. And then finally, SAF production. We've got to continue to show progress, both in terms of the amount that we uplift, but as well as, again, shovels in the ground in the United States is going to be key for sustainable aviation fuel, because we know that the U.S. is primed to be a leader in sustainable aviation fuel. We have support at the state level. We have support continuing at the federal level. But, our hub systems, our hub groups through our SAF hubs have to show that we are serious about it. And we are, again, working through the development challenges. And so our blending hub coming online later this year in Minnesota through the Minnesota SAF hub will be a really wonderful milestone.
Mm-hmm. And I guess people that wish to see more information about all these initiatives, they should check the ESG report that you publish every year.
Yep. You got three things. You've got delta.com/sustainability. Our new ESG report will be out in about a month and a half. And follow me on LinkedIn, Amelia DeLuca. We've always got good updates to share.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I think we are kind of running out of the time we had allocated for this call, but I really appreciate your time today and giving us such a comprehensive overview of what one of the largest airlines in the world is doing in sustainability. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you, Mikhail, for the time. This was a really great conversation.
If you like this podcast, you can support us by giving it a great rating on Apple, Spotify, or whichever platform you get it from. And remember, you can, of course, subscribe to it. And you can also get regular updates through the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv. We have a newsletter where we cover the aviation industry every week with a special focus on innovation and sustainability. So give it a go. Thank you and goodbye.